All right, let's talk about Makhi Hughes. So, GoDuck777 sends this one in. I was actually just about to shoot another one at you. This was from a previous set of questions. I want to make sure I gave this one full time because it deserves a full answer here. Makhi Hughes, this is for Spencer's Scale of Agreement, or the SSA, will get over 7.3 yards per carry. LaMichael James and LeGarrette Blount both had that. I think this O-line and his abilities, it's possible that can be broken. So Hughes last year at Tulane was awesome. He was one of the highest graded running backs in all of college football last year, regardless of conference, according to Pro Football Focus. This is a guy who may very well be one and done with the Ducks because he's got kind of a similar build to Jordan James. They're a little bit shorter, a little bit stockier, well-built. Hughes has got a bit more lateral quickness. Like you'll see him kind of chop and shuffle his feet in a way that James did more than he probably gets credit for. But overall, he's more one-cut, downhill, run-through-you kind of back. And he, of course, was very successful in that role. Now, Jordan James in 2023, when he was the number 2 to Bucky Irving, averaged a significantly higher yards per carry. He was over 7 per touch than he did in 2024. Now, you'd expect that. Kind of. It's easier to do when you don't have as many carries, but when you're getting, 20 to 30 a game, then, and I don't know if James was even in that sort of range, but when he became the number 1 guy, he got the ball a lot more, so you're going to have more opportunities to go behind the line of scrimmage. But Jordan James the last couple of years was really good. Makhi Hughes this year for the Ducks should be really good. Now, last year at Tulane, he was about 5.3 yards a carry, which is right around in the same range that Jordan James was last year for the Ducks, who was at 5.4. But the year before, James was 7.1 and hit a lot more home run shots. I think that had more to do with the offensive line than James himself. But the reason I say Hughes can be better than Jordan James, or at least could have a better season in some regards than James did this past year, is the lack of explosion in Oregon's run game. And when Dan Lanning first got to Eugene, the run game would carry the offense and the passing game was complementary, and that has shifted more over the last couple of years, and part of that's because they run more RPOs. I wonder if that doesn't sit in the back of Dan Lanning's mind from time to time. This conversation comes up a lot in this offseason. I've talked about it over on Locked On College Football. With regards to Georgia, the Bulldogs last year, who have 5-star tailback Nate Frazier, he was a true freshman, I believe, this past year, I think. My everydayers will remember that name because he was an Oregon target at running back, somebody that Carlos Lachlan really, really wanted. Yeah, he was a class of 2024 guy. He was a borderline 5-star recruit, number 2 running back in the class. Dude's a stud. They couldn't run the ball last year. They simply couldn't. And so what the national narrative surrounding Georgia is this year, from me on Locked On College Football, or Josh Pate, Joel Klatz mentioned, everybody sees it, is Georgia going to get back to being a more dominant run team? Well, remember that Dan Lanning comes from that particular coaching tree, was on that staff before he came to the Ducks, and they ran the ball really, really well, and the passing game was still explosive and dynamic, but more complementary, and you felt like the run game could carry you at times. Last year, Oregon's offense was not really capable, aside from like the Michigan State game, from being carried by the rushing attack. It's not that it was bad. They had a 1,000-yard rusher. They still had respectable numbers. It was not as good as it once was. They have run for fewer yards per game in each successive year. It's one of the few stats that has trended downward in each successive year that Dan Lanning and his staff have been in charge. So I think from Makhi Hughes, he's a guy that has a little bit more lateral movement, maybe a little bit more ability to cut to lanes, a bit like Noah Whittington at times. I think those two have pretty similar running styles, which is why I'm interested to see if a third running back significantly gets into the fold this year. But I'm looking for this offense to have more explosive running plays than they did, particularly early on last year. I mean, the running game was, of course, a huge struggle against Idaho. It was better, but not as good as you'd necessarily like it to be against Boise State. There were a lot of explosive passing plays in that game. Jordan James didn't have a run. I think it was either over 15 or 20 yards until the Michigan State game. And it's not that they were bad. I mean, James against Boise State last year, 17 carries, 102 yards, 6 yards per carry. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good 100-yard day on under 20 carries. It's good and efficient. But the running attack wasn't carrying the load. The team on the whole, now college factors in sack yardage, which I think is really, really stupid. Oregon as a team ran for 109 yards against Boise State in that one. They were outgained on the ground 221 to 109. And of course, we saw the limitations of that running game in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State when they couldn't run the ball literally at all. So early on, whether it's Hughes, the offensive line, the scheme, a combination of the three, I'd like to see them be able to get back to that more. And it doesn't mean you have to create, Bucky Irving style runs from the Holiday Bowl or LaMichael James runs from back in the day or anything like that. You just have to be able to not rely so heavily and exclusively on the passing game to create explosives. Do they have the ability to? Of course. Dante Moore can make every single throw on the field. He's got a bunch of different weapons to push it down the field to, whether that's DeCorian Moore, Justice Lowe, Malik Benson, Jurion Dickey, Kenyon Sadiq. All of those guys can create explosive plays of 15 or 20 yards or more. I forget what the qualification is for being explosive. I think it's 20 or more. It might be 15. But whatever it is, you don't want to have a running game that is only, not like old school Stanford under Jim Harbaugh, 4 yards in a cloud of dust. But even if you watch Sharon Moore's Michigan team now, who was, of course, Harbaugh's offensive coordinator during their national championship run, they run the ball a lot, right? They throw it as, I don't want Oregon to look like that. But even a team that is predicated on physicality and running the football and power O and all that sort of stuff, they still create big explosive running plays. And that was missing from Oregon's offense last year. I do think part of that was the offensive line. I think those guys were really good. They were definitely better in pass protection than they were in run blocking throughout the season. But this offensive line with Poncho anchoring in at center is going to be different. We'll have a chance to be better than they were a season ago. And then you combine that with the fact that Hughes, I think, is a little bit more like my initial reaction, I think, when he first transferred to Oregon was, oh man, he might be able to create more explosives than Jordan James did. But then I remembered back to what I mentioned earlier, which is Jordan James was over 7 yards a carry in 2023. So it's not like he couldn't create him. I think the offensive line just wasn't quite as successful winning in run blocking situations as much as they were last year. Back to the SSA that GoDuck777 sent to me, though. Makhi Hughes will be over 7.3 yards a carry. I'd be ecstatic, man. I'd be ecstatic. Like if Oregon got Tyler Atkinson, I'd be ecstatic. That's a 2. That is such a high bar to try and clear for a guy that hasn't even hit 5.5. I know he's at Tulane, but he's going against he's going against American teams while playing for an American team. Like now he's on a Big Ten team going against a Big Ten team. Like I think that he is real good, and I think he goes well over 1,000 yards this year. Over 7 yards a carry? Yeah, that's a tough one. So keep the Spencer scale agreement takes coming in. I'm loving them. Recruiting, on the field, off the field, whatever. I'm always here for it. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.